let me welcome you all to this info session about our upcoming Customer Insight course. I'm Rita McGrath. You probably knew that. And what we're going to be launching is a cohort full of learners. Some people will be participating as individuals. Some people will be coming with a whole team of people from their company, and all are welcome. So this will give you a little bit of flavor for what the live sessions are like and what you can expect in the course. And so I'll take maybe 20, 25 minutes to describe that. I'll show you what the course looks like. So we'll have a little demo, and then we'll open it up to questions. And it's really anything that's on your mind. You can put questions in the chat. You can also raise hands, whatever you think is good. Just a reminder, this is being recorded because there were people who were interested in attending but couldn't actually make this time slot. So don't say anything you don't want your grandmother to read about in the New York Times. So without further ado, we're talking about a program that we're calling the Customer Insight Program, which is a set of 6 courses designed to take you through a lot of the principles from the discovery-driven growth system. So it's largely under the umbrella of customer insight, but it's really in the context of growth, change, your strategy, how you might think about developing a better approach to dealing with customers. And I'm reminded, in light of the absolutely epic flop of CNN Plus just last week, how far we have to go to really learn some of these basic lessons of how do we create great customer insight. So the course gets going with a couple of observations. The first is, as Peter Drucker very famously said many years ago, the customer seldom buys what the company thinks it's selling them. And the reason for that is that we get all wrapped up in our own processes, our own systems, our own internal references, and we don't pay enough attention to what's going on outside in with customers. And the first big problem has to do with how we think about customer sets to begin with. And that's relevant to the question of customer segmentation. And if you look at most companies, what they do is they segment on the basis of age or how wealthy you are or where you live, basic demographic segmentation. And the problem with segmenting that way is, firstly, it doesn't really tell you very much about customer behavior. And secondly, if you can segment that way, so can anybody else. And the problem that you have is it doesn't give you a competitive advantage. So we're going to really hone in on what are the key behaviors that are driving customers to act the way that they do. And the seminal idea we'll use there is something called customer jobs to be done, which is, don't think about customers as buying your product or service as much as you might think about them hiring your product or service to get jobs done in their lives. So a really good insight into this is something I call a customer consumption chain. And this is the reality that your customers are always engaged in these webs of experiences, chains of experiences, beginning with, I know I've got a problem, I'm looking for a solution, I search for a different provider, I see what might be out there, in terms of who's willing to help me solve this problem. And you can see it all adds up to a chain of experiences, beginning right from maybe I become aware I have a need, all the way through, in the case of a service business, referrals to other practitioners or the opportunity to re-engage, to re-sign a contract. And here's the thing. The customer experiences these consumption chains as unified wholes that they move through. But when the chain breaks, your whole consumption experience can come to a complete stop. Furthermore, most companies are remarkably uninformed about what's really going on with customers. And a day-to-day example of this is just have a look at the abandonment rates for internet shopping carts. And I find this statistic fascinating. So depending on your sector, right, beginning with finance, which has an over 80% abandonment rate, all the way through to gaming, what you find is that people put stuff in their cart, their shopping cart, and then they don't follow through. Now think about that from an operational point of view, right? You've marketed, you've got the customer to come to your site, they're interested enough to say, yes, I looked at it, you've put up the photographs, you've built all the marketing collateral, and yet something goes wrong. and they don't end up completing the purchase. And so you have wasted, in the case of finance, 80% of the time customers don't actually become a customer, even though you've done everything right to get them to engage with you. And that's an example of a flaw in the consumption chain. So we'll be learning about how not to have that happen. Because very often what we're thinking about is not what's on the customer's mind, right? It's the customer is thinking about something else. So why do they abandon carts, right? And a big reason that they abandon the cart is the shipping took longer than I expected, or it was going to be more expensive, or, I just want to make my purchase and you're forcing me to create a password and register, or, myriad other reasons like that. And here's the problem. We don't understand the customer's experience well enough to know that that's actually happening. And I think that's a huge issue that we need to be dealing with when we're thinking about customer insight. So what do we have in our current learning hub? Right now we have 6 courses that we're offering for this current cohort that kicks off in May. The first course is really the foundation course. It's called Discovery Driven Planning. And it has to do with how do you plan when you don't have the knowledge that you'd like to be able to make solid decisions. And the concept here is that in the beginning, when you're doing something new, you've got a huge range of assumptions that you're having to make relative to knowledge that you have. So don't spend a lot of money at that stage. Keep your experiments small, keep your learning in small gradual steps. Don't go big splashy. This is gonna be $1 billion business, and I'm going to spend hundreds of thousands or millions, or hundreds of millions in the case of CNN Plus to go figure this out. You want to be learning and letting your expenditure grow as your learning evolves. And so that's a key pattern that you want to be pursuing. Then the next session is really about doing insightful customer interviews. And what you find with customer interviews is that we often do a very bad job. We ask the customer directly, would you buy this thing, right? And the customer, they're nice people. They don't want to offend you. And they look at your thing and they say, yeah, absolutely, I'd buy that. It doesn't map to their behavior. So we're back to this behavior again. And a great example of a company that learned this lesson, that behaved this way, is the company TripAdvisor. And somebody at TripAdvisor came up with this idea of having a local news feature on a website for a site, right? So let's say you're going off to, Laguna Beach, California or something, and wouldn't it be great to know before you went, like, what's going on in the local news? Wouldn't that be fantastic? And everybody thought, great idea, terrific, yeah. And when they asked, they interviewed customers and they said, would you like a local news feature? And almost to a person, they said, absolutely, we would love a local news feature. They didn't build it. They didn't build it yet. What they did was they put a little button on the various websites for these destinations, and they said, click here to learn more about local news. And guess what? Nobody clicked. Turns out what we say we think we'd like is local news, and that seems like kind of a good idea when you think about it, just first look. But when it comes to actually spending the time and the energy, giving you my email, actually then getting the email, then reading the local news, I actually don't want to behave that way. And so you want to test these things out as early as you possibly can with as cheap a mechanism as you can. A lot less work building a pop-up button that says, would you like local news, than it would be actually building out a local news feature. Then the next mini course that we're going to have has to do with initial prototypes. And a lot of people think a prototype has to be a lot like the actual thing. And I would argue it doesn't. What you're trying to build is something that will give you some insight into a customer's reaction to a part of your offering. You may not even build the whole offering. And the TripAdvisor button that I spoke about is a kind of a prototype where you're putting something out there to get a genuine customer reaction. So in this session, we're going to talk about design thinking. So how do you look at customer behavior and get the empathy to know what the customer is going through? We're going to look at how you build prototypes. We'll draw on the best thinking from the Stanford Design School and explainers from Harvard Business School, and some lessons from me in how you can actually build a prototype and deliver a specification. And this is a core piece of the discovery-driven planning system, because what you're going to be doing here is saying, it's not enough to think I have this great idea. What would this great idea have to do to actually deliver a result that I want? So that's what the deliverable specification is all about. And you'll learn all about that in that course. The next course really has to do with something that is new in the world of customers, marketing, and strategy, which has to do with the whole impact digital has had about how we compete. The boundaries of firms are getting very porous. Ecosystems are competing with ecosystems. And in this course, this mini course, we'll be exploring how do you define the data coming out of your system? How do you think about that data in terms of being able to create value for you beyond your product and service attributes? More importantly, we're going to be thinking about ecosystem strategy. How do you think about your ecosystem competing with the ecosystems of many other entities as you go forward? So we'll draw on my work, of course, but also the work of people like Ron Adner, who wrote a great book called the Winning the Right Game, which is you can't just be thinking about yourself in isolation. If you think about the big companies, the super successful companies today, most of them are ecosystem players. They knit together offerings of other players in creating something that adds value to an end customer. So we'll be giving some thought to how you think about ecosystems, ecosystem construction, ecosystem offense, ecosystem defense, as well as your digital data definition with respect to customers. Then, you remember those prototypes that you were working on? Well, the purpose of doing a prototype is to find out what doesn't work. So just as TripAdvisor learned that the local news feature actually wasn't going to drive traffic or purchasing, we're going to focus in this mini course on learning from surprises, learning from failures. I'm going to offer you a perspective that says failing can be done by design. Failing can be done in a way that is very constructive and in which you can learn a lot. So I'm hoping to reframe what failure means in your minds and the minds of the participants in the course as learning experiences. And we're going to be creating hypotheses. We're going to be testing those hypotheses. And we're going to be showing you a more constructive way to think about what goes on when things don't work out. Finally, the last mini course is coming back again to really insightfully looking at customers and how we segment them. And we'll use a couple of different tools. We'll go back in history and look at how Best Buy used customer segmentation to do one of the very first customer-centric transformations in retail history with my colleague Ron Boer, who's going to walk us through how that went and how they really used it to inform what went on in their stores. We'll be looking at how you think about customer behavior. I'll use the example there of the Kone Corporation of Finland, which used it to really differentiate the way that they sold elevators, escalators, moving walkways, and doors. So for those of you that are from B2B businesses, don't think this course is just about consumers. It's not. It's really about customers and their customers and their customers. And finally, we'll bring it all to a conclusion with the introduction of the consumption chain, and we'll give you some very useful exercises to do throughout that chain. So what you got all together is 6 mini courses, each of which are composed of anywhere between 5 to 7 lessons, downloadable worksheets, downloadable templates. We've got some spreadsheets in there. We've got PowerPoints that you can use if you want to use these ideas in other contexts. And then we'll have a couple of info sessions with me, scheduled ones throughout, but we're also going to have what we call our Talk Hub, which is a community area. And Jacora, who's my co-host here, as well as Flaminia, who's also on my team, will be moderating that, taking your questions. We'll be responding to questions week by week as we go. So there are 6 mini courses. We've structured the program to run over 8 weeks because, life happens and you hit a week where you don't get to it, or if whatever happens, you're in a crunch, it's a rush. We want to give you the time to get caught up so that you can kind of go along at the same pace with your cohort. So let's have a look at what the courses look like. So when you log on to what we call our Learning Hub, this is what you'll see. And this is the actual website for the Customer Insight Program. And as you scroll down, you'll see there's an introduction, there's the fundamentals, which is discovery-driven planning. And each of these courses is set up with a series of lessons. You'll also have an assessment. So at the end of each mini course, there's an assessment. It typically consists of 10 to 12 questions, which have to do with the course content. It gives you some confidence that you have, really picked up what's in the course. If you're an HR leader or someone who's sending other people, that'll give you a sense for who's mastered the material, and give you confidence that they're making progress. Each mini course consists of some video lessons from me, some content. So this is what the video is. I won't put the sound on, but this is what it'll look like, and it's got a whole.
Now we get to the fascinating question, right? Which is really at the heart of the discovery-driven growth system.
So you'll see there's video, there's worksheets that you can download, there's deliverable specifications, and so forth. And so you'll see spreadsheets, templates, worksheets that you can kind of work through at your own pace. The course also has some text that you can kind of scroll through. And that's basically what it looks like. So that's the actual experience. When you finish each lesson, you mark it complete. And that'll take you then to the next lesson. When you're all the way done with the course, what will happen is you'll take the last of the assessments, and then we'll get you a certificate, which is freely available to post on social media or share at work or whatever. So it's kind of our equivalent of a badge. So that's the essence of the idea. And now let me stop sharing and we can open it up for questions and discussion.
Hi, Rita. This is Noel. I'll get us started, I guess. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Hey, Noel, glad you could join us. I'm glad you made it this time.
Absolutely. I found it helps when customers or clients or companies apply on real projects in the moment. So to what extent are you going to encourage or get your, the users of the system, and I think it's great, by the way, to actually, in parallel with learning, apply it on real projects. So they're learning while they're doing it on real projects.
Yeah, so a part of this system actually connects to something, Noel, that I think you're aware of, which is our Spark Hub system. And Spark Hub is really designed to take you through the checkpoint planning process of discovery-driven planning. And you'll see these first few all have to do with customers, because that's really where you want to start, right? Before you get into operations or planning or anything else. So the vision for it is that you'll have a checkpoint, which is a moment at which you're going to learn something important. And let's say your whole team doesn't really know about customer interviews. So if you had a team going through this, when they get to that checkpoint in their process, they could hop on over to the learning system, take a week to learn all about customer interviews, get some good ideas, pop back into the Spark Hub system, which is kind of like a software spine to your discovery-driven growth process, and then work on your checkpoint. And then as you make progress, go back and forth between the two. So that's actually how it was designed. But several people have said they would really value having it as a standalone course. So we're offering it that way as well.
Excellent. Thanks.
Cool. We'll have to get you in. We'll have to get you into the demo. That'll be really fun.
Is this a new group of courses, or is this have you been teaching this for some time?
This is new. Now, some of the concepts I've written about before. So some of the ideas have been published in the Harvard Business Review or in my book, Market Busters. But the course itself is all original content. I have not taught it in Columbia or anywhere else. It's so the frameworks are familiar, but the actual manifestation is new.
Okay. And one more question. So this is there's going to be I forget what you call it, like a community hub for discussion in groups. So there'll be sort of a cohort, so to speak, of going through this together.
Yeah, our hypothesis, I'm testing it too, it's our hypothesis, is that, you learn as much from each other and from asking questions and having conversations as you do from a one-way conversation with me. So we thought it would be great to really create a cohort that can go through the experience together. And, you may learn something that's really relevant to, say, Ken, and you can then kind of create a horizontal communication as well as top-down. If you'd like to experience the course, Jacora is reminding me that we have a free demo course. If you look in the chat, there's a link to that. And the demo course consists of 2 lessons from my book, Seen Around Corners, which you can take for free. And you can experience what the actual feeling is of going through a mini course.
How large of a group you expect to go through this at once? How big is the...
I am thinking somewhere between 30 and 50 in this initial cohort. So I'm actually hoping it's not too big, because I really want to be able to see what each person's experience is like and get feedback and improve the course. So, we're engaging together in a kind of a collaboration. So I'm thinking 50-ish would be about as much as I'd want to support. Now, if your company has a lot of people you want to go through it, we can figure out a way to make that work as well, if it's really something that meets an urgent need.
But I just want to understand what your audience would be for this course. I really enjoyed that you talked about ecosystems. We're in the middle of a large sort of supply chain, but it's very, very specialized. So then it's how do we scale this? Is this as we're definitely not as big as TripAdvisor. So, but I'd love to be able to apply some of this because we have our challenges.
Oh, it's meant to be very applied. It's absolutely meant to be very applied. So, you're in a B2B context?
B2B and B2C.
Okay.
And so it's dissecting who we're talking to.
Right.
Segmentation's big, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go through, how do they behave, right? What are their key behaviors? And the core idea here is that people are very used to thinking of themselves inside an industry. And I think that actually creates a lot of confusion because today with digital ecosystems, what we're seeing is industries are competing against industries, right? So your most significant competition could be something that comes along and makes what you do irrelevant or lessens customers' willingness to pay for it, right? So for example, imagine TomTom, the mapping people, and they make devices, and the devices tell people where to go, and that's been their business for years. And all of a sudden, Google comes along and uses the phone-based device to make what you're selling completely irrelevant. And so, how do you compete with that, right? And so, what we're going to try to do is get a level deeper and get into what I call the jobs to be done, which is don't think about customers buying from you. Think about them trying to get their jobs done. And that's really the first step towards behavioral segmentation. It's what is that end result, that outcome the customer is trying to drive? And then what are the actual alternatives to doing business with you? Like if you didn't exist, what would they use, right? Would it be an intern? Would it be a competitor product? Would it be doing nothing at all? I mean, the biggest competition most of us face is the choice to do nothing. So we'll be getting into that. We'll also look at how you can use prototypes, even in a B2B context, to elicit more of that information from customers. So there's a question about whether the course is applicable to a certain industry. Really not. We have examples of digital companies, mechanical companies like Kone, the elevator makers. We'll look at ecosystems with things like Echo built inside Amazon's Echo. We'll see how that emerged. We'll look at prototyping, which is a way that Alberto Savoia, who wrote a great book called The Right Hit, talks about how do you market test a hypothesis early on. So it's really applicable pretty broadly.
Rita, hi, good morning. I'm Anant and I'm calling you from India. I can't turn on my video. It's fairly late in the night. So I'm not very presentable. I have a question. Like Bruce, I'm a consultant myself. And our question for you is in the wealth management industry and in the life insurance business. Mm-hmm. We have gone through the jobs to be done and we've identified a list of needs and we've done the interviews, we've parameterized them. But one of the issues that we're facing today is the outcome of the jobs to be done framework in the wealth management industry is essentially process innovations. Mm-hmm. And leading to digital products that customers can interface with. Right. But the output of that process is very different for every customer. So how do you then look at this framework in the context of jobs to be done and in the context of customer insight? How do we craft this whole storyboard to figure out as to how are we competing? Are we doing the right thing? Mm-hmm. Are we offering the right kind of insurance? Because each individual has got a different need. Right. So how do we craft that story? Well, I hope I've made myself clear. I'm not too sure.
Yeah. So I think the short answer is that you need to be able to have a certain degree of customer self-customization, that you need to have a path that guides them enough that they don't get lost, but that they can actually tailor the offering in a way that makes sense. So one of the companies I'm working with is Fidelity Private Investment. So it's in the wealth management private investment space. And the kinds of things they're doing there, as an example, they've got a lot of organizational innovation, which this course doesn't get into as much, but it's very relevant to your question. And this would be the kind of thing that we take up in our virtual live sessions, right? So we answer your specific questions, even if it's not part of the course. So specifically what they did at Fidelity PI is they completely changed the way that they work. And so the way that they work now is they've got small teams which are given the task of understanding a particular customer issue. So I'll give a specific example. In 2021, in the US, we had the advent of these meme stocks like GameStop and other stocks where investors were using platforms like Robinhood to basically gamify investing. And, and you had this whole crowd of basically young investors coming in who operated on a totally different logic than traditional financial planning or investing would have been. And so the people at Fidelity PI looked at each other and said, this is not a problem a bunch of 50-year-olds are going to solve. And so what they did was they had a small single-threaded team that spent, I think they spent 6 to 8 weeks just really working through how the Fidelity app could be gamified in the way that the GameStop, the Robinhood people had done. And if you look at the Robinhood app, I think it'd be very illustrative for you because it is infinitely customizable in terms of its outcome, but it has like a basic framework that it offers. And so to me, it gets at this question of how do you scale something that's customizable? And that's really, I think, at the heart of what you're looking for. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Hello, Rita and Fernando. I'm a coach for market researchers and insights professionals, and something that's it's an off topic from the course. It's something that is always in the mind of my clients, is that being an insights in a corporation is not really a path to the corporate office or to the C-suite, and it's a lot of frustration that it's such a valuable part of the company to being able to understand their clients. That's where the root of the company's success and value future is coming, but it's not valued within their companies. What are your thoughts on why this happens, what this phenomenon is going on with? Because it's really something that I've been with market research for about 20 years, and it's been there forever, and it's something that it should probably be changing, but it doesn't seem to be moving. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's a similar problem that we have in the world of innovation, right? Where CEOs run around talking about, how important innovation is. Same conversation. Customers are our number one priority. And then you talk to the people that actually have insight into customers and they can't get the time of day. So I think the first question to ask yourself is, and this is a political issue. This is not a data issue, right? So the first question to ask yourself is, who are the allies across the organization who have a vested interest in seeing that these insights get acted on? And they could be people that you aren't even thinking about. It could be people, in operations or people in even finance that are interested in having the company not go over a cliff because they've missed something important in terms of customers. And what you want to do then is really build a political coalition. And the framework that I use to do this, and Jacora, we have a thought spark on this. It's called The Necessary Art of Politics. If you can maybe put that in the chat. And basically what I advise people to do is say, okay, you got a goal, right? The goal is, I'll make this up, to make sure that we don't neglect a rapidly growing but not very affluent segment of our potential future market who could be important in the future, but right now they're small. So nobody's paying any attention. That could be your goal. And what you'll find is if you think about who's going to benefit versus who's going to suffer from you achieving your goal, that will tend to motivate them to behave in a different way. And then you've got people that are actually engaged and people that aren't. And if you just make a simple little 2x2, what you'll find is you've got some people who are very approving of what you're doing. They really want you to succeed, and they're very engaged. So those are your heroes, right? Give them every bit of resource that you can, and help them achieve what they want to achieve. And what the mistake we make is a lot of times we ignore them. Then you've got the category that's fascinating, where they're going to benefit from you succeeding, but they're not involved. It could be because they're in a different division. It could be because they're a customer. It could be outside your organization. It could be a member of your supply chain. Your job there is to mobilize them. Get them moving on behalf of your goal. The third category are what I call sleeping dogs. If you succeed, that's not going to be good for them. And my advice there is, don't wake them up until you have to, right? And then the last category, of course, are people who don't like what you're doing, and they're very much involved, whether it's visible or whether it's behind the scenes. And there I recommend kind of a gradation, so start off with, well, can we co-opt them somehow? Maybe we can find a common enemy, or a common vision or something that we have in common. If you can't co-opt them, maybe you can buy them off, right? Maybe you have to give up something that they could agree is worth having. If you can't do either of those things, can you just get them to neutral? They don't have to be raving fans. They just need to get out of your way, and so forth. So what this gives you is a cascading series of activities that you can engage in to achieve your political goals. I would say probably the biggest problem is that, and I hear this in a lot of different departments that don't feel they're getting paid attention to, they don't realize it's their job to do this political work. They just assume everybody's going to see the brilliance of their work, and when it gets ignored, they get offended and slink off. If you want the leadership of a company to pay attention, you have to be prepared to get their attention, do the work, make the case, and tell the story about how great the world could be if they listen, and how grim the world could be if they don't.
Just something to add to that was that sometimes these kind of professionals are in a bind, because you're supposed to be very rigorous and take a perspective that is neutral. I mean, in taking the customer's perspective, but then inside you have to have like a point of view, or it's, I mean, they're accused of not having skin in the game, of not being really the person responsible for the end results or the end outcomes. So that's something that it's not the political end, but the internal end of how to deal with paradox and being able to, like shifting perspective, having something from, like, this is the clean data, this is what the data is saying, and this is my personal opinion, and this is what I would be pushing for if I were, like in charge of the end result. So, it's kind of difficult for people to, like toggle between those different perspectives and faces also internally, because it's very demanding emotionally.
Yeah. I mean, and I agree. If you have something that you're passionate about, that you have a lot of conviction around, yeah, it's an emotionally expensive kind of thing. One thing that I would be cautioning you, right, is in any decision situation, you have sets of indicators. You have the data, right? And the data fall into basically three buckets. So the first bucket is lagging indicators. Great information, can't change it. You can't do anything about it. And most of the information I see being used in market research is lagging. It gives you a lot of great information about stuff that's already happened. Then you have current information, which tells you kind of where you are. So things like, what's the current customer sentiment? What's our net promoter scores look like? What's our employee engagement? Because that's very closely related to customer satisfaction. The hardest thing to get a hold of are leading indicators. And leading indicators are where your marketing people add the most value. So a leading indicator is something that tells you about the future. And where I see big gaps in marketing is not enough emphasis on leading indicators. Where are we going? What's something I could look at today that would tell me about something that's going to happen down the road? And if you are effective as a marketer, you will be developing great stories about leading indicators that are going to really matter. So as an example, I'll use Facebook as an example, even though they're not my favorite company in the world, but back in the day, there was a lot of increasing evidence that users were not going to be connecting to social networks on computers, that they were going to be using mobile. And it took a long time before the market became so absolutely clear that eventually Mark Zuckerberg said, don't bring me any plan for any project that doesn't have a mobile component. I'm just not even going to look at it. And it took about 3 weeks before the company realized how serious he was. And eventually they rolled out their mobile offerings, which even today are not necessarily exactly what a consumer wants, but it forced the attention of the company to pay attention to that evolving trend. So I think, one of the things I see as a big risk for the marketing function in general is they don't pay enough attention to leading indicators, and they overweight on quantitative indicators and underweight on qualitative ones.
Well, hi, Rita. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Yeah. So I got here a few minutes late, but just like my goal of the course, I guess, if I were to, put a specific objective would be, let's say we have 500 or 1,000 potential key ambassadors we could recruit for our programs. So I'd like to be able to find like 50 that will champion it. So that's really my goal, would be to be able to shape a message, have a strategy to engage them and hand that off to our sales team. So I don't know, is that like an appropriate alignment for this course?
Oh yeah. Because what you'll be doing is you'll be using the tools to figure out which of those ambassadors' behaviors are the ones that you want to key in on. What are some of the quantitative examples of those behaviors? So are you looking for people with a big social footprint? Are you looking for people who have a lot of credibility, who get mentioned a lot by other people? So when they post something, does it get reposted by a lot of other people? So you could be building that out as a way of looking at that. How is the business doing now, though, that we're coming back to being in person again?
It's so much more fun when you have forward momentum and are growing again. So we're smaller than we were, I'll say, a few years ago, obviously, but just to have that forward growth is.
Yeah, I think you could apply. I think you could apply the concepts to that particular outcome. And then, we can also, as you would think about the chat and additional resources we can bring in when it comes to, how do you identify an influencer, right? How do you develop an influencer strategy? And I think that would be a very interesting conversation to have in the chat.
Yeah, because there's thousands of them, but we don't know which ones will get excited by us. So I'd like to find the key phrases or the whatever materials we can put together that will attract the.
Yeah, a lot. A pro tip there is look at reviews of projects or processes that meet similar jobs to be done, and find out what the keywords are that people put in their reviews. And you can use that to sort of architect what your own experiments might be around keywords.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you. So looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
It would be fun. It will be fun. It's a bit of an experiment for me. And I should sort of say what the motivation is for doing so much of this stuff. It's that, I teach at Columbia and it's great. And I give speeches and people come and it's like, whoa, the scales have fallen from my eyes. This is amazing. And then they go back to their companies and it's like, what is this? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it what is it? And so that was really what underlies the founding and the operation of my sister company, Valise, which is really about tools and building capability. And so the learning that we're doing here, I found was a real missing piece, because I'd be leading people through a discovery-driven process, let's say, and we'd get to a stage which was, okay, we need to go get some customer insights. And they don't know how to do it, right? They don't have the capability. They've never experimented with it. They haven't given it a try. And so the idea here is that this can really help at scale get a whole group of people up to speed on what you need to know in order to make progress on an uncertain kind of venture. And right now, everything's uncertain, right? We're sort of past pandemic, but it's still popping up in places. They're not very happy in Shanghai right now. And so, we're going to have to plan and be resilient even when we can't plan the way that we would feel more comfortable doing.
Okay.
So just to wrap up, the course, which includes the learning modules themselves, which are videos, downloads, some text, assessments, and a certificate at the end, will be launching the week of May 9th. I'll be having the first live info session on May 11th. We have a couple of other scheduled ones, and we may schedule them kind of as needed as questions come up throughout the course of the course. It will run all the way through the end of June. We'll have a graduation the first week of July, roughly. And the goal there is, although there's six courses altogether, that you can take them with a break or two in between, and that way you're not feeling like frantic and rushed to try to get it finished. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see some of you in May when we get started.